welcome to As Goes Wisconsin. Jay Metnair in for Kristen Bry. Greg Bach, Carol King with me live in the studio and joining us now. So glad to have him with us. Investigative reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, John Diedrich, is here. Good morning, John. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How are you all doing?
Really
Good.
well. What an excellent piece that you have about gun deaths in Wisconsin. The headline, gun deaths are rising in Wisconsin. Suicide in rural areas are a big part of the picture. I'm always impressed by the effort that goes into an investigative piece like this. How long does this take you, John?
Well, in this case, and thank you very much for the great intro and comments. This piece was I did this through the Marquette O'Brien Fellowship for Public Service Journalism. This is an opportunity where journalists can take the better part of a year to really dig into this. And so I was at Marquette. I had some students that were working with me on this, and so I literally sort of left the Journal Sentinel starting last summer at the beginning of the school year, and had office over there in the support of Marquette. So yeah, we worked on this. There's various aspects of it, the reporting naturally, but also a big data collection effort, and that took a year to do.
Well, and I just want to impress. That's why journalism is so important, and that's why local journalism is crucial, because in order to really get at some of this stuff, you have to have the bodies to and give them the time to do this. And that doesn't happen for nothing. It doesn't.
Okay, so John, what's the baseline? Give us the brass tacks of exactly what's happening here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, so I think the story sort of starts off with the question of, like, what do you think of when you think of gun deaths? And I've been a reporter at the Journal Sentinel for 20 years, and so I've written a lot of these stories. But what people's ideas usually goes to issues about homicide, and particularly city Milwaukee homicides, which is important and are happening. I'm not trying to diminish those. This project seeks to elevate and reveal new categories and not suppress others. But homicide is one. Accidental shootings or negligent shootings or police shootings are another category. And taken together, those do not even come to a third of the gun deaths in Wisconsin. That's 71 out of 100 gun deaths every year are suicide. And while those circumstances are importantly different between a suicide and a homicide, it's important to consider them together, as Sarah Kolbeck from the Medical College said. While it's important to understand the differences, what this does is this opens up an idea that gun deaths are affecting everyone across our state in different ways. And when you adjust for population, Milwaukee is actually not the top county for per capita gun deaths in the state. And so just that fact was new. And I've covered this issue for a while, not that I know everything by any means, but it was new information. And as I'm hearing from readers, that's a new category for them as well.
John, what is the top county for gun deaths in Wisconsin?
It's Iron County and Rusk County. There's a series of small counties that are in the northern part of the state, that the Native American population is large. The suicide rate is super high there, and I think it's really important when coming in, and I should have said this at the top. But in all the discussions I'm doing about this, I think it's really important that we know that if you're hearing this now and this is a category for you and you're concerned or you're feeling suicidal, dial 988. That's the phone number, the national phone number, and here in the state to call and get help. It's really, really important to emphasize that as well. But yeah, it's those smaller counties that people might not think of in terms of gun deaths. And I've looked at the data from places like Iron County and Rusk County and others. It's all suicide. And so what we were asking for was gun deaths from every county in the state. We got them from 71 of the 72 counties. And what we wanted to do was help people, kind of give a snapshot while also protecting people's privacy and not exploiting really terrible situations, but helping people kind of understand and pulling back a little bit the curtain on something that we don't traditionally write about suicide very often. And so that creates maybe an impression among some that it's not as frequent, and it is super frequent.
I got to be honest with you. I have a very dear. I live in Ozaukee County, and I have a very dear friend who was a cop, and he was telling me about Ozaukee County, and I was shocked at the number of suicides that he said that he got called to, and it was all gun, all gun. And I was just, in little, here I am, little Ozaukee County queen, and I just, it was just unbelievable to me, the stories he was telling.
Yeah, it's the Ozaukee County data did really jump off. And when you think about the lack of homicides in some of these areas, like I said, it really dominates. And again, firearms. I should say at the outset, the majority of people that I talked to for this project were gun owners. So that I think then we can talk a little bit more about kind of what I learned in those discussions. But what our efforts were and what we're calling the project is behind the gun. And that works on two levels. One is to see the data behind the gun. And more importantly, in my opinion, is to see the humanity behind the gun, to see the people who are victimized or have died, have suffered in this way, whether they be the person who actually was struck by a bullet or family members, and also gun owners themselves, who I learned were just a varied lot, and we can talk about that. But yes, it was surprising to me when I saw the data. Again, firearms are the most common means that result in a death and suicide. And it's not that gun owners themselves, there's no data to suggest that gun owners, by the fact that they own a gun, are more prone to mental health problems or crises. But it's that when those things come up, which they do come up for all of us to some degree, the means by which somebody might have to act on an impulsively very dark thought it's very deadly with a firearm, because without getting into too many details around means, because that can be problematic as well for our audience. But I would just say that firearms are the most lethal, and they're not reversible.
John Diedrich is our guest. He's an investigative reporter with the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and we're talking about his recent piece in the paper about gun deaths on the rise in Wisconsin, with suicide in rural areas a big part of the picture. And I just want to reiterate what you just said, John, about gun owners are not inherently more suicidal or more likely to have crises, but it is the immediacy of having that weapon there and its efficiency that is really more of the issue, right?
That's right. And it's when you look, it's the most common means, and it's also the most lethal means. 90% of people who attempt. It's really important too. One thing that I heard, just side note here, is that sometimes you hear this comment that if somebody wants to die by suicide, they will. And certainly there are cases where that has happened, but the data doesn't really support that. And let me just explain. If somebody attempts and does not die by suicide, of those 10 people, 1 will go on to die by suicide in a subsequent attempt. 1, so 10%. However, if that first attempt is a means like firearms, it's unlikely there's going to be a second or a survival and so forth.
In a second attempt, sure.
Yeah, so it's just important to know, and that's one of the things that people like Gene Papalia, who is a retired Madison cop, told me about, and Debbie Trader, who's in Wausau, and Sarah Kolbeck here at the Medical College. They all really felt important that that's one of the public service things that we could convey, that means matter. And that conversation is happening among gun owners. That was a surprise to me, that I did not realize the communication among gun owners. There really isn't a gun community. That was one of the things I discovered. There's a lot of people who own this object who have very sort of different views.
Sure.
But within that group, they are very concerned about this, and there are new conversations that are happening, including at gun shows, including at different places that one might be surprised, where they want the issue. These people who sort of have bravely stepped forward in what I think is going to be a movement of talking about mental health among gun owners. And there's barriers to folks getting mental health all across the board, and it seems particularly acute among some gun owners that I talk to.
Well, and in the rural areas,
Right.
there's just mental health deserts all over the place, and that just makes it worse. And again, I want to reiterate, 988 is the national number to call if you are having suicidal ideation or anything like that.
Okay, now we're seeing the numbers rise in Wisconsin, but it's a national issue, obviously. Did you do any case-by-case comparison of the states, of other states, as to what's happening in their areas?
Yeah, so I did look at the CDC numbers, and so what generally, okay, so 71% of our gun deaths are suicide in Wisconsin. That's running about 10 to 12 points over the national average. But again, the national average is really, I mean, it's a big number. You're blending together 50 states. It can be misleading, but it is trending higher here. We're not the highest. There are counties or states out west, like Utah, like Wyoming, like Colorado, where they have very, very low homicide rates and very high suicide rates. In fact, in Utah, the number in some years was up around 90%. They have almost no homicide, but the suicide numbers are really high. It was really interesting, the approach that was taken in Utah, and them inviting in some public health people, a very conservative state, inviting in people from Harvard to help them kind of tackle this issue and think about some public health and public information campaigns that could be useful. And then there's other states where you're seeing much lower, but you're exactly right that the number of suicides are definitely climbing, and we see in Wisconsin, for the first time last year, more than 500 people died by gun suicide. The overall number of gun deaths has essentially doubled from 2004. That is driven partially by suicide, also partially by homicide. And I don't want to forget about accidents and police shootings, but just to keep in mind, those are like 1% and 2% of the total. Now, there's a reason why we in the media and the public in general notice those, because of the circumstances, and in case of accident could be just incredibly, especially tragic victims. But the drivers of the big numbers are in suicides, and those are hitting disproportionately hard, especially white males over the age of 50.
John Diedrich is an investigative reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Recently has an excellent piece in the paper about the number of gun deaths in Wisconsin, and especially looking at the suicide aspect of that. If you have a question for John, you can text it in at 844-967-2789. Coming up next, John, I do want to ask you, and I thought it was so interesting when you mentioned as well that these discussions about suicide are coming up more at gun shows and among gun owners themselves, about some of the people that you spoke with who said they have taken the weapons of some of their friends for a period of time when they felt vulnerable.
Right.
And so we'll talk more about that. That's all coming up next. Stay with us. You are listening to As Goes Wisconsin, and we're on the Civic Media Radio Network. Good morning. Welcome to As Goes Wisconsin, 10 minutes before 11 o'clock. Jane Matner in for Kristen Bry, Carol Kane, Greg Bach in studio with me, and joining us, an investigative reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, John Diedrich, is here talking about his article about the number of rising gun deaths in Wisconsin, and especially focusing on suicide in rural areas. And Greg, we had a guest in yesterday that also kind of ties into this whole discussion.
We had the executive director of End Domestic Abuse Wisconsin, Monique Minkins, and she was telling us that a new report that they just released was that there was 96 murders attributed to domestic violence, half rural, half urban, but a majority of them by gun. And I was wondering if you could speak to anything about that with regard to your research and what you found as far as domestic violence and the use of guns.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Let me say at the front end, we happen to have a fantastic investigation dropping just today from Ashley Lutheran, who's a colleague of mine at the Journal Sentinel, about this issue, and it looks not only at the victims, the primary victims, but also the children that are affected, who have been lost parents in this process. And Ashley has a really interesting new look at the way the way that issue is playing out. She has written really importantly about domestic violence for years and years now. One thing that is really important to remember in firearms, not only in suicides are the most lethal, but in homicides, and they're the most common weapon. And I mean, it sort of makes sense because they are designed, as one person that I interviewed, he said these were not designed to shoot cans or targets. They are used for that, and people use them for target shooting and so forth. But they were designed to kill people and animals and people, depending on which order you happen to be and so forth. But that's what this instrument is. So they are very effective at doing what they do. So when impulsive situations come up that may be conflict, like a domestic violence situation, a firearm really elevates things. And that's why when somebody's talking about an intervention around suicide or around a possible homicidal situation, one of the first questions is always about, are there firearms in the home? Right. And does the person have access to them? Access is a really key thing, because if there is some distance that can come between the strong feeling, whether that be a homicidal feeling or a suicidal feeling, space and time is your friend in that case. And when you can create space and time, some of those thoughts can go down, and the impulsive thoughts can go down. It's that when the firearm is really accessible, easy to get to, and something is happening, that's when things that are horrifically tragic are happening frequently.
If you or someone you know are having suicidal thoughts, you are in crisis, even if you just have questions about, am I in crisis? 988 is the national number to call. Reach out for help. Talk to people. John, you said that over the course of your investigation, you found that among gun owners now there's more discussion about this, and even some who have taken their friends' guns when they felt they shouldn't, when the gun owner felt they should not be around their own weapons, right?
That's true. And there is a sort of phenomenon, if you will. I don't know if that's the right term, but it's something that happens among gun owners. It's fairly typical. And I was talking to a researcher from Harvard, Kathy Barber, and she had never heard about this until she did some work. And it was sort of interesting. I mean, she's like a non-gun owner, so she wouldn't necessarily know this. But among gun owners, it's fairly typical that gun owners will hold guns for friends and family in times of distress. Some estimates now are that 30% of gun owners report doing this. And we have some more coverage coming in this project, and we're looking at some of those questions. But like everybody I talk to, like every gun owner that I talk to, knew about this. Like this happens regularly. And this is not government involvement. This is not a red flag thing. I mean, that's a different thing. And it's an important question. But this is grassroots, like somebody saying, hey, I need separation from this gun right now. And actually our first story in this project was in August. We published something on what's called the Gun Shop Project. And what that allows is a place where if somebody doesn't have a friend or family member that they could bring a gun to for temporary safekeeping during times of distress, that gun stores are opening up. There's 40 gun stores in Wisconsin. And again, this is a voluntary effort. This is not government involved and so forth. This is gun stores stepping up and saying, hey, we want to be that location. That's really important too. In a state, we don't have a universal background check, but in states that have universal background checks, you would have to, if I were to transfer to somebody else, or a gun owner would transfer to somebody else, they would have to do a background check. And so that's one of the hurdles that is being said. Like, if now, let me just be clear. This also, though, depends upon the person who's in the crisis to be of a mind enough to be able to do this. But
Right.
that actually happens. And as Emmy Betts from Denver said, she's a researcher in this area. She said, we always have to start with the voluntary in mental health. It does not respect the patient's sovereignty and their decision making to go to involuntary means. And our systems are set up to be rare, that we rarely take away people's freedoms, like a temporary detention or something like that, that we're always trying to invite them into care. And that's what we're seeing right now in the among gun owners that I talk to, is that, hey, let's come out and be more proactive. And I even saw that there was a gun show in Milwaukee in September, and there was a group that has formed to try to bridge this gap between gun owners and the mental health community, to say, hey, let's not be the tough guys or women. Let's start talking about mental health, and let's just talk about, what's happening with the suicide issue, with this thing that we love. They love firearms, and they want to make sure that they are respecting them and being smart when times get difficult.
Thank you so much for joining us, John. It's a wonderful, wonderful article, and I highly encourage everyone to read it. We will put it in our show notes after the end of the show. And anytime you have anything else that you're working on and you want to join us, please just let me know. We would be delighted to have you back. Again, that number 988, if you are having thoughts, if you are having a crisis, take advantage of it. And stay with us. You are listening to As Goes Wisconsin on the Civic Media Radio Network.